Thank you for finding the NSE podcast on YouTube. To find links for our online hospitality security training, check out the video description below. Enjoy the Nightlife Security Podcast.
This is Dave Manick, the Associate Publisher with ED Publications, and we're here at the Gentlemen's Club Owners Expo 2013, and you're listening to the Nightclub Security Podcast.
Welcome to the Nightclub Security Podcast, a professional resource for the nightclub security industry. Whether you're a nightclub bouncer, guard, owner, or operator, this is the podcast for you. We're here to inform, educate, and entertain. Let's get started. Welcome, everybody. You listen to the Nightclub Security Podcast. This is Manny Marquez. I'm here with industry expert Robert C. Smith. We're coming to you live from our wonderful Mission Hill studio in sunny San Diego. Robert, how you doing today, buddy?
Doing great.
Are we all recovered from Las Vegas?
I know I am. It always takes a couple of days. This is not a normal Vegas trip. For those of you that go to Vegas, this is not just going to, karaoke bar, casino, maybe see a show, lots of drinking. Now throw in that this show that we were at is the Gentlemen's Club Expo, the strip club show. So it's a little, you kind of add a day to recover because of all the extra stuff you do and the shows, the different things you get to see and do.
I took a whole week.
Well, and that happens as you get older.
Yeah, for sure.
How'd you like meeting Ron Jeremy?
Oh, that's right. I did meet Ron Jeremy on the floor. He had a very distinct scent. It was a different kind of cologne he was wearing. I don't know if I was throwing back or what.
He's at every show. This year he's got this, I think it's a rum that he's selling.
Yeah, like Ron's Rum
or something like that. But he's always so nice and outgoing and friendly, and we talked to him for a bit.
We ran into Vince Neal.
Yep.
He has a partnership with the club with the Deja Vu group.
Girls.
So that was interesting. We had our friend from the East Coast who came in and helped us out, Rick
Beislein out of Virginia.
So that was good to see him.
Can you imagine him meeting any celebrity and not acting like a little girl?
Yeah, he was very giddy when he saw Vince.
Giddy,
Yeah.
Good word.
So yeah, I had a lot of fun with Rick. After that, you took off to Texas. I went to Colorado for a little leisure time. So now we're back in the studio, ready to get back at it. Today, we're going to be talking about security hiring, best practices, things to think about as you assemble or add to your security team.
What I envision this as is that you don't do the hiring on Thursday to work on Friday. And I know this is going to be kind of tough for some of the operators to really wrap their head around with so much to do. But we'd like them to think 2 to 3 weeks ahead and keep a running log of people as they're thinking about hiring.
Yeah, basically just some things to consider as you hire and maybe get out in front of it. I know it's a difficult task, but we'll get into that when we get into the main part of the show. But always, as always, we want to talk a little bit about what's in the news, and got a story out of, once again, Florida.
I guess this is the third story in a row.
They really produce great news out of Florida. Whatever it is, if it's something interesting, it's coming out of Florida.
Well, this one was, we posted it on Facebook a week or so ago, and I wanted to bring it up again because it's something that really bothers me on many levels. This was a gentleman, Mr. Poindexter. Just hear this quick story. Mr. Poindexter had a friend. She got in an argument with a couple of her friends, and Mr. Poindexter took it on his own to wait outside of a front yard with his .22 rifle with a green laser scope.
That was very important in the story. It had to be green.
Well, I guess it was something he had to do. But he's waiting across the street. He fires multiple rounds, over 10 rounds, kills one of the women, shoots the other one, injures her. And
well, wait, Bob, what does this have to do with nightclubs?
Well, it has nothing to do with a nightclub or a bar or anything. But it just so happens that Mr. Poindexter happened to be a bouncer.
So wait, this didn't happen at the club?
Not at a bar, not at a club. It had nothing to do with.
Was he working at the time?
Not working, not employed, not a bar fight, nothing.
So why are we talking about it?
Because you say the word bouncer, and it brings up a mental image and connotation to people.
What was the title for the story?
It's the Orlando Sentinel. Bouncer sentenced to life for Daytona Beach shooting. It had nothing to do with his job. And let me ask you, and I asked this on Facebook, if he was a barista, if he was a flower arranger, would this be barista sentenced to life for Daytona Beach shooting? No way. I don't think so. But we discussed this. And
so you're getting to a point, Robert. What is it?
The point is that you're not just a guard at your club. You're not a bouncer at your door. You're more. Your title of bouncer or door guard or floor host or ID checker comes with great responsibility, and people that you don't know will use your position to make things more sensational. This guy, I don't know him. I don't know anything about him. He tried to help his friend and shot 2 people. It had nothing to do with the industry, but the first thing in the news is bouncer, blah, blah, blah.
So I think your point is that there are certain occupations that carry a certain amount of weight that the media will use to add context to the story, either positive or negative. So,
and that's exactly what happened here. They wanted to grab some headlines, and this is a terrible thing.
Other occupations that would do this would be if you're a police officer.
There was, and I think I didn't post this one on Facebook, but I read it. A Pittsburgh police officer was off duty, had nothing to do with his job, but he's off duty in a bar. He gets in an argument with one of his buddies, and he shoots his friend, and his friend dies. But the news headline was, of course, off-duty Pittsburgh police officer kills friend in bar fight.
So it had nothing to do with him at the time of him working as a cop, but because he's a cop, that gets thrown in the headline. Another occupation would be something like a teacher.
And we just had one here in San Diego. A Carlsbad, I believe, or some city principal was arrested out of our city at the Burning Man festival with drugs. Big deal. But they label the teacher or principal.
Yeah. So the point of the point of us bringing up this story is that because for whatever reason, bouncer carries a certain weight or a security guard carries a certain amount of weight when it comes to public perception. And I think because you're expected to hold yourself to a higher standard is why the word bouncer was used in this news story. And it's just something to consider, something to think about in the role of being a bouncer or a security guard is you are held to a higher standard.
You are, whether you accept it or not. It's a way of life, and you really have to wrap your head around that, not only while you're working the door and what people expect of you, what law enforcement expects of you, what your supervisor expects of you, but even when you're somewhere off duty and you tell people what you do, they immediately have an idea of what they think of you.
Yeah. And so it's just an interesting story. We'll actually put a link up on the show notes if you guys want to look at it a little closer. Robert, I wanted to give a mention to one of our friends, Chris Lenahan. He is the author of a book called The Little Black Bar Book. It's been out for a couple years. And he also has a website called openingabar.com. It's just an interesting resource. If you're an owner operator and you have a bar that's open, or you're already up and running, or if you're planning on opening another bar, it's just a great resource. He has a lot of good information. He has some video content that comes along with it, and he does some great blogging, and just a good individual, good resource. It's kind of like what we position ourselves as a resource for the industry. So we're more on the security side of things.
It's also nice that he's put me a part of his team, and his team are industry experts, industry people that can help his clients or anyone that comes across his website to do the best job they can.
So yeah, part of it, he's an author. He has a blog. He's a consultant. He actually has a couple places in Portland. But anyway, I'm going to put a link up to that on our show notes, openingabar.com. So check it out if you get a chance. Great resource. I'm sure we'll probably eventually have him here on the show to do an interview with us.
If not in person, by phone.
Yeah. So with that, is there anything else we need to mention before we start the main part of the show, Robert?
Nope, that's it.
All right. Well, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll get into the main part of our show today, which is security hiring, best practices. We'll be right back.
Thank you for joining us on our weekly podcast. Please like us on Facebook at Nightclub Security Consultants.
All right, and we're back. And so we're going to jump into today's show, which is security hiring, best practices. And I think probably the best way to set this up, Robert, is that we kind of break it up into the different steps when it comes to hiring an individual and bringing them into your organization. And we've broken that up into 7 different steps. The first one would be recruiting. The second one would be the actual initial screening process. The third step would be application process. The fourth part would be the interview. The fifth part would be a comprehensive background check. And then the sixth part would be hiring. And then the seventh would be after this person's on your team after the hiring. And I think that with the information that we're providing today, that a lot of this information is going to cross over into the hiring of pretty much every personnel or every personnel type onto your team, and not just security. But what we're going to try to do is be very specific towards the security side of things and things to consider so that it relates when you're bringing someone on your security team. Robert, we've kind of had some back and forth about this prior to this show and talking about the overall process of hiring somebody. And one of the things that kind of stuck in my mind as part of our conversation is that a lot of times for a lot of managers, a lot of operators, a lot of owners, that hiring becomes a spur of the moment, last minute thing. And we kind of want to, really what we want to do is put it in the manager's heads that this is something that is what you would consider a maintenance item.
Well, like so many of the topics, I think every topic we've already podcasted on, and the training topics that I've taught in Vegas and around the country, if you take some of this stuff, if operators take some of these ideas and use them, they can save a tremendous amount of money. And hiring the right person automatically means you're saving yourself money. You're not having to fire them, retrain them, live with their mistakes, live with multiple mistakes, then fire them and rehire them and train someone else. Hire the right person to begin with that's going to fit with your team, and you've saved yourself money.
And I think the whole process of hiring, it deserves the time and attention that you give it to up front. And it's going to save you a lot of time in the long run. And it's just one of those aspects of the organization and to where being prepared is going to pay off in the long run.
And I would guarantee an operator, a manager, small venue, large venue, if they take half of what we say today, implement it, and really do it, as hard as it may seem, it's not, but you'll get in the habit of doing it, just like you're planning your menu change, you're planning your spring change, you're planning a carpet change or a kitchen remodel. Plan on hiring and have a stable crew of people, and all of a sudden this is right there with everything else on a daily basis.
From an operator standpoint, I think the way to think about this is always be looking, always be in the mode of hiring. You're always hiring. You might have a stable staff. You might not have had any turnover. Things might be going well, but keeping your eyes, ears open, keeping the practice there to where you're actually looking for somebody. And I would even say make it once a month, make it part of your monthly practice to go through an interview process or to have an open application process to where you're being able to meet and bring new people in. So the first part leads to that, which is the actual recruiting process. Where do you find the people that you're bringing into your organization? Are you posting ads on Craigslist? Are you posting ads in a local publication? Is this something to where you're going out and you're actively looking for people at another bar or nightclub? I was
shocked at a couple of large establishments on the East Coast who they run $1 million business. They're selling $500 tables. They bring in world-class DJs for one day and pay $6,000, $10,000, $12,000. They're making a lot of money and they're spending a lot of money. And I was there on a Wednesday, I think it was, and he had 3 guys that he was hiring that walked in the door to work there. And I thought to myself, how can he take such little time and not get his staff involved, not get an interview involved, just to hire guys while he's running this $1 million business? It kind of goes with what you said. If you talk to your staff about who you want to hire, don't just say, hey, if you have a friend, tell them we're looking for a door spot. We got a guy who left and we have a door spot open. Tell them what you want. We want a guy who's clean. We want a guy who's not on drugs. We want a guy who is going to show up on time. So if your friends don't fit that, don't tell that friend to come get a job with us.
Yeah, I think part of the recruiting process, even prior to that, is actually sit down, write a list of specifically for that role. What do you want? And be specific. Be very detailed in what you want that person to look like, to act like, what type of experience. And then when you're employing your team, your current team, to go out and find those people, or do they know somebody, you can be very specific in saying, this is what we're looking for.
And you'll be surprised that if you tell your employees that, when they're off on a Monday night, they may be at another venue in your city or a neighboring city, and they'll see a door guard, a floor walker that they know, and he fits or she fits all the characteristics you asked about. And they'll walk up and say, hey, we're looking for someone else if you don't work on weekends or you're looking for another job. But they've already almost pre-screened for you. This person's already in the position. They're holding themselves well. They're dressed appropriately. They're acting appropriately. And your own teammate found them for you at another location and basically headhunted them away.
Yeah, in my experience, the two methods in which I found my best employees has not been on placing ads or a Craigslist or an open call. I think that the best employees that I've had have always come from a referral from another employee. And the second one is if I've been out and I've taken note of somebody in that role who would fit well with our team. And so those two types of recruiting are really good. So, getting referrals from your teammates, your current teammates, and then actually going out and finding people that are in that role that you would like to work for you.
And don't be afraid. The most common method, I think, we've mentioned two, using your employees and having them find maybe their friends or someone they know or headhunting for you. But don't be afraid and shy away from the old way. Manny mentioned it, putting an ad on Craigslist or putting an ad somewhere else. But be ready for that cattle call of bad applicants and pick out 1 of 10 or 1 in 20 that might be the jewel you might want to hire.
Yeah, my advice would be for an open call like that, if you're putting an ad out, is to set a specific day, give yourself between, certain amount of hours, like between 1 and 5, where you're accepting applications. Go through the initial screening process. You're going to get probably, 100 applicants. You can weed out the 20 that are actually not the 20, but the 80 that don't work, and keep the 20 that are going to work, and then you bring them back for a follow-up interview. So, you almost need an entire day to vet through that process.
Now, those are the three things that we talked about before, we've talked about just now. Notice that we didn't say, and we know it might happen, but we didn't say, hey, and don't forget, it's a good practice just to, on Thursday, when you need someone on Friday, to, a guy walking in the bar and he's a regular and he's a big guy and he's always getting drunk at your bar, but he sure is nice, to say, hey, would you like a job? That's not one of the best practices we would ever recommend.
Well, yeah, and again, one of the main points of this podcast is that you kind of want to get ahead of it. I think just the nature of the industry, you're always trying to just to hold on. So sometimes it becomes a habit when you do your hiring to do it last minute, and this is something you want to get ahead of.
Especially when it involves a position that could cost you so much money, whether it's excessive force, missing an ID, or doing something else dumb in the heat of a moment.
And that's, we'll get to the screening process, but we'll talk, as we go along through this podcast, we'll talk about why is it so important coming from a security aspect of finding the right people. So once you've done the recruiting, once you've found the people that you want to bring aboard, there's the initial screening process. And it depends on how you actually interact with the individual, how you're going to do the screening. There's things you want to look for.
We had a disagreement on this, and I think it's a good disagreement, and you may, the listeners may want to toss both of these back and forth and pick one out. But my idea was, whether they're recruited by an employee, a friend, or another worker somewhere else, or they walk in off the street, if they walk in and it's Joe and he's wearing flip-flops, a pair of shorts, and a tank top, and it's almost like he came in on a whim and said, hey, are you guys hiring? Manny's thought might be, and correct me if I'm wrong, but his comment to me was, well, I know I'm not going to hire that guy, but I give him the time to fill out the application, and I'd give him a quick review and send him on his way, but I wouldn't hire that guy. Is that about right?
Yeah, basically, if you're going to come to where I'm working and looking for a job, I expect a certain level of presentation of yourself. And if that doesn't come across right off the bat, I pretty much made my decision.
So here's a guy, Joe, that walks into your bar, whether an employee told him to come in, whether he's a roommate of one of your bartenders who's a good guy, but he doesn't have, and I want to call it the respect enough to put on a good show for you when he walks through the door. My idea is to Let them fill out the application and say, you know what? I just don't think you're going to work out. You came here appearing to be unprepared to even have an interview. You're wearing flip-flops, a pair of shorts, a shirt. And my thought here is maybe he's never been told how to go to get hired as a whatever. His parents didn't teach him. He didn't get it in high school. He didn't get it in college if he went. No one ever told him, and he thought this was acceptable because this is a whatever bar.
So you want to send him off with a little bit of a learning lesson from the experience. Hey, next time you go somewhere, why don't you try this?
I would even tell him, look, if you really want to work here, come back in a week. Come back a week from today, but come back presentable, and then we'll start this all over again. And maybe he comes back and he's spit and polished and clean and ready to go. Maybe he doesn't. All right, heck with him then. But maybe he does, and you found someone really special.
Yeah, you got a good point, but I don't know. So I guess just in my experience has been, I've pretty much made my decision on that instant, which is a good point, because if you're a bouncer listening to this, or if you're someone out there looking for a job, consider your presentation when you walk into a place. And it's another thing is if it's a referral from another employee, I give them a little bit of leeway as far as their presentation because it's more of an informal. But if it's coming cold in off the street, you should be looking sharp. You should be looking like somebody who wants a job.
I want to see what they bring when they come in, whether it is a referral or a walk-in. If they have a resume, even if it's a single page, half page, that they've done this and this and this.
So here's what it is to be prepared for an application, to fill out an application or ask for a job. Be looking sharp, be presentable, have your best foot forward, come in with your resume, come in with all your information that you're going to need to fill out an application.
You mean you don't want the guy to come in and say, hey, I don't have the phone number of my last address. Could I get back to you on that?
It's good practice to have everything in line. Be ready to fill out that application. The second part is, or the last part is have a pen. You know how many times I've handed an application to a candidate and they've asked for a pen, and right there you talk about a split-second decision on whether or not I'm going to hire this guy. If you don't have a pen, what are you going to be like when you come to work?
Now I want the listeners just to think for a second of some of the things we've said. This is a person we're looking to hire. Yeah, I know we may be paying minimum wage or 11 or 12 or even a whopping $15 an hour, but we're putting so much pressure just the first time they walk in the door. Folks, you have to put that pressure on someone when they walk in the door if you expect them to exceed what you want them to do when you hire them.
Because, really the human asset, the human resource is your most valuable asset that you're going to have in your place. They're the heartbeat of any establishment, and so it requires that sort of scrutiny. So that's kind of like the initial screening process, is that presentation of someone and how they come prepared for the process of filling out an application. The third thing on our list was actually filling out of the application. So Robert, what are some of the sort of things you look out for?
Well, first off, make sure your application has all the right questions. If you pull one off the internet, make sure it has the right questions you want to know. There are plenty of resources out there that will give you the application very specific to security or nightclub, bar, restaurant, hospitality security. And if not, create one yourself, because you want to know what experience they have, what licensing they may have, what training they may have or not have, where they worked before, who was their supervisor, who was the general manager of the place, the times. These are some basic things that many applications will have, but something like, we had this discussion, have you been convicted of a felony? What about, have you been convicted of any crime? Because there are many serious misdemeanors that you might not want to hire this guy because of this conviction. So if you just say felony and your application just says felony, he says no. But he's got 3 domestic violence battery convictions, misdemeanor convictions, because he's lost his temper, has a short temper, hasn't completed his year of anger management courses, but because you only asked for the felony, he was all right in saying no.
So really look at the questions. A lot of people use boilerplate template type applications. These are things that have probably been passed down or carried over. but really take a look at your application and make sure that the questions that you're asking fit the information that you actually need to make a good decision.
One of my clients in California, we've said this before on our podcast, requires all in-house guards be state licensed. They added a block on their application because they're in California. So they added a block just for that question. So it's always, yes, do you have your current California PSO license? Yes or no.
So on your standard application, the question might be, if applying for a security position, do you possess whatever licensing is required in your state? If there's none, you might ask if they have any sort of training pertinent to their position.
And that's another one, because we're getting a lot of people taking our online course, our California online course in its different name for the rest of the nation, called the Host Platinum course. And they'll get a certificate of completion. That is the highest level of online training available for any in-house guard. But if it's not on the application process, for them to write down that they got it, number one, they may forget it. Number two, you may forget to ask. But it comes with a certificate of completion. It comes with something you can verify and refer to. But if it's not on the application, it may get lost in the shuffle.
All right, so that's from the employer's perspective as far as what's on your application. If you're somebody filling out the application, my advice would be make sure that you're filling out the application completely. And for employers, make sure that you're looking at how an individual fills out the application. It doesn't have to be...
Do you want them to be able to write?
To write and to be legible, you can tell when somebody's actually spent some time and given the attention to the application that it deserves. There's other times you get an application and it looks like this guy just flew through it because he wanted to get in and out as quickly as possible. And that tells you a lot about that individual, because if this is somebody who rushes through their work, are they going to be somebody that's going to complete their shift wire to wire? And the chances are probably no.
Are they going to pick up a lime wedge?
Are they going to do all the closing out duties? Are they going to do all their paperwork when they're asked for? And also that's another aspect is security guards oftentimes are asked to write incident reports, which was just a show we did last week. And if that individual doesn't even care that much to fill out an application, what's your incident reports going to be like? Are you going to be chasing up work? Is this guy going to be saving you time, or is he going to be somebody you're going to have to handhold through the process?
A quick sideline story there. One of my clients in Boston made a joke out of a guy's application. Now, the guy was in his late 30s, and he was illiterate, didn't finish school, and he filled out an application. He had worked at a job for a long time, and they showed it to me and said, look, this guy can't even spell. Look at the way he spelled street. Look at the way he spelled this and that. And I looked at his resume, and the places he'd worked were pretty good. And I said, he's older. He's lived life. This guy may be a diamond in the rough. What would be wrong with hiring him and maybe offering him some training on reading and writing? Adult school, something that maybe no one's ever offered him. Now, not only does he feel empowered by what you did for him, it's almost like he owes you.
So I'll go one further. If you're an individual who has problems with reading or writing, don't be afraid to tell the employer, because that necessarily doesn't keep you from being hired. I would suggest put that on the open and say, I might need help on this application process because I don't know how to read or write, or I have difficulty reading or writing. We've had people in our courses who have taken our classes who've had problems writing, and we've paired somebody with them to assist them. That's understandable. But if it's, it would benefit you to tell the potential employer of your situation rather than trying to conceal it, hide it, because I think most people would be understanding of that situation. So anything else on part 3, our application process? Anything else you can think of?
Well, remember that the position of a security guard, and I've said this, I think, probably 3 times in other podcasts, that position is the police of the club. They handle problems. They're expected to know things, the policies, procedures, the rules, the regulations. They're the first contact with the police. They're the first contact with a guest that's being violent or rude or anything like that. I want to relay a quick story as a police officer. They told us, this was a 65-page application that I filled out in 1991. And they said if there's one blank spot, they don't care if it's an area code, a zip code, a checkbox. If it is not completely filled out, we will disqualify you. And, that told us. They told us. And still, you'd see guys getting a letter of thank you very much, goodbye, and they didn't know why. And sure enough, they left out a zip code from their second address they lived in 4 years ago. Well, you left it out. They told you don't leave things out, and you did it anyway. That's the attention to detail that the police department wanted to see you had. And I would kind of say you need a very similar mindset when you're reviewing a security guard applicant's paperwork.
I would agree. And if you're the employer, look for those sorts of things. If you're the candidate applying for the job, if there's something you don't have or information you don't have for whatever reason, let the potential employer know that, so that at least it's been disclosed. But just comes to the point of when you walk in for that application process, make sure that you're prepared and you have everything in line, because that's going to be important. We ready to move on to the interview process?
Yeah.
All right. So the interview process, Robert, you and I both have a couple different perspectives. With an individual who's coming in as a security guard, what should that process be like?
Well, and I think when we discussed this, we kind of walked on each other with our discussion. But I also believe that there should be two phases to the interview.
When you walk on me, it hurts more because
I'm bigger.
You're bigger.
Yes, and muscle is heavier than the fat on my ass. But when we discussed this, it came down to, I believe you like a 2-interview process, and I like a 2-interview process. But I opened it up with, operators, managers, if you're listening, try this. I don't know many that do this, but there's one really good client. They're up in Anchorage, Alaska, and they do this. At least they were doing it for years. The applicant would come in, they'd fill out their paperwork. They'd tell them, okay, we're doing our interviews next Tuesday. Next Tuesday, the applicant would come in. There'd be 8 other applicants. But the bar had their manager, their bar manager, and 3 or 4 guards sitting at a table with chairs, pens and paper, and they did a panel interview of each of the applicants. After the panel, they told each one, okay, we'll call you and let you know. The ones that succeeded in the panel were asked to come back a week later for a one-on-one interview. And most of them were eventually hired.
So I think we could even, okay, so on the panel, I like the idea of a panel interview. I think that normally the way that the interview process goes, there's probably part of that initial screening, even during the application process, where there's a small exchange and you can kind of get a good feeling about somebody. And if your instincts tell you to move forward with somebody, then there's that first interview, which could be a panel interview. Now, the hard thing with panel interviews is you have to get organized. You have to, it's hard to get everybody together at one time. So this might be a process that happens once a month, maybe twice a month, where management team sets aside a designated time, on the 2nd and 4th Monday of every month. This is our panel interview time. With the panel interview, Robert, you raise a good point that when you go through that process, your questioning should be pretty close to the same for each candidate.
You don't want to throw curveballs at each different candidate. I learned this the first time I went through an interview, again, as a police officer. Whether you're applying for any position, they'll have a panel, and the questions are all the same. You're weighed on your answer and the quality of your answer, and everyone's weighed on the same level. And I found it to be, really, really productive, especially when I later got to sit on a couple of these interview panels. It was really productive.
So with a panel interview, if there's going to be a time for a scripted set of questions, this is your time as a panel interview. And the reason why is because you want to allow the management team to see how each individual handles the same question. And an example of a good question would be, I think you came up with it, Robert, which was...
It seems so basic, but, and it may never happen, especially if you work at a small bar, maybe you work at a different type of club. But applicant number 1, you're working the door, and a gentleman walks up and he slips you $100 bill and says he needs to get this girl in.
Who's underage.
What would you do?
And to kind of read their body language, their eye movement, how do they answer that question? What would they do?
And the other part of that, though, Manny, is you your panel has to pre-discuss the answer. What do we know the answer might be? What do they think we want to hear? And what should their answer be as part of our team? So on that question, your answer will probably be the typical, I'm a team player. Oh, I turn them away and say, no, thank you, sir. But don't be surprised if you get an answer that says, well, I don't know. You know what? It's pretty tempting. I'd have to think what I would really do with there.
Yeah, so it's good practice to have it scripted. Have yourself 10 or 15 questions. I would give each manager an opportunity to ask questions so there's interaction between the candidate and the management team, not just one individual. The downside about a panel type interview is that it can be very, very intimidating for the candidate. And you oftentimes do not get the person in front of you during that interview that is the real person.
Correct. Their nerves, they're afraid. They've never been in this type of interview. I understand that.
It could be very intimidating. And I think I am very, when it comes to the interview process, I like to do the interview process more than just one meeting. I like to do multiple meetings, and you could do it with different parts of your team. But I think one of the most beneficial types of interview is a one-on-one as well. And so after a panel interview, we would suggest to do a one-on-one interview or maybe two-on-one. But the one-on-one, the thing that I like about that, especially if you're good with interacting with people, is that you're able to bring their true colors out.
Their personality.
And you get to really peel back the layers of this individual and really find out what makes this person tick. And I wouldn't rush the process. I would say the second interview, a one-on-one, give yourself a lot of time of 45 minutes to an hour at least. I've even gone through processes where it's been longer now. You can almost overdo it. But the point is that you really want to find out what type of person this is. I think that the process should be a little bit looser than a panel interview.
I've done those one-on-ones, and I've always thrown in some of the same questions they may have gotten in a panel to see if their answer was the same, similar, or better, because they felt more comfortable. They were a little bit loose. And I would do it. I actually did it here in California at a client where we walked while we did the interview. We went into the bar, and it was closed. It was a club, and we sat at the bar. Then we walked to some of the posts. We talked about their position, and each time I got a chance to ask a question from the panel, I would ask it at the exact location. I said, well, show me what you would do here. And you were absolutely right. It brought out who they were on how they would handle things, and it actually came out a little bit better than it did on the panel.
Yeah, and it's probably a good practice that, during that one-on-one process is to have the formal questions and then have the loose questions to where you can kind of, there's the questions that are going to relate to the position that you're going to want to know, and then there's the questions that you're going to ask that are going to relate to the person and their character. Robert, do you have a favorite question you like to lead off an interview with?
And I do. I get operators that sometimes don't like me on helping them with their panels because I will ask someone straight up, especially if they're applying for a bouncer, security, floor host. I'll say, how many altercations have you been involved in at work? From the day you started being a door guard to now, your application says you were at 3 different establishments, and this is a period of 7 years. Now you're applying for our place. I want to know how many altercations, minor, winning, losing, police involved or not. I want to know how many. I don't know their answer. But if they say none, they're lying. They're lying. They're afraid, so they lie because they think we want to hear, oh, none. Everything's handled in a calm, friendly. We hug everyone when we walk them out. No, you don't. There are altercations weekly that you're involved in, but you're not telling us about them. And I need to know if that person's, number one, going to tell the truth.
And that's your leadoff question?
That's my go-to number one because it tells them.
It's funny because it's the security side of what you do, and I'm thinking operate. My leadoff question normally is, where are you from? And that gives me a good idea of, are they from the area? It kind of gives me an idea of regional habits. I think you'll find, and most owners can agree, is that depending on where you're from, you have a different type of work ethic. And that kind of opens the door to many other questions of what their character is like, which is important. What else with interviews did you want to throw out there?
It's really it's a tough, it's a perspective thing when you do these interviews. The many that I've done, you'll have disagreeing points, but you want to, meaning each manager, each person hiring, each person assessing this applicant will have different feelings. And you have to try to come to the best resolution regarding this person as an employee. And you'll never agree 100%. There'll always be something, but don't be afraid of that.
And I think another important thing about the interview process, if you're on the side of the person interviewing, is you're really trying to find out the character of the person, because I think that is important. I mean, there's the experience part, but I think the more important part is the character. And you can always ask that question of, what your level of trust with someone. On the experience side of things, you have to consider, what are your expectations of that individual? Could they meet those expectations? Not only could they meet those expectations, but could you clearly communicate that expectation to that individual and that person understand it? And then another thing I think that a lot of employers or managers miss out is, how does this person going to fit in with the rest of my team? Is this going to be somebody that gels well? And I think that's a lot of times that's something that's missed.
One of the panel interviews I sat on and watched and participated in, they brought in their whole security team. There were 9 guys, and they all sat at the table. And at the end, when the applicant walked out, they would all say, give a vote between 1 and 10 on several points. One was, could this applicant fit our current team? And they would vote 1 through 10, an 8, a 6, a 4, a 3. And they would use that paper Olympic style grading for, could they fit into part of the team? Would you work with this person? Do you feel you can trust this person? And they had another question I can't remember, but they graded them. And it worked so well for them. But they did it once a month, and they had all their whole crew there to do it with the manager.
That's a great idea, because it's a grading system, but you can quantify it, and it's something that at the end of the process you can take your best candidates and you can move forward with them.
Yep.
So one of the things, number 5 on our list here, is background checks. And this is oftentimes, and it's surprising how often this doesn't happen when it comes to hiring a security guard. Now, Robert, you're hiring somebody in a security position. Why is it important that we do background checks?
Well, there's a couple of reasons, and one of the biggest reasons is, this is a security guard. They're the person that is tasked and given the responsibility to provide a safe environment, to be the person where if a guest is hurt or needs help, your guard is the one that's supposed to go there and help them and do it right and be responsible. The background check may come up nothing, but it may come up with a couple of red flags that this isn't the right type of person to do this job. Maybe they can work great in a back of the house kitchen capacity, but dealing with people at the door, being told, you're nothing but a security guard, you piece of crap. You can't get mad at that. And if this guy's got a history and it comes out in his background check of anger issues, you got a problem.
So let's talk about actually, the first part would be to find yourself a good company to work with as far as conducting background checks. But when you get the results of these background checks, and they're going to need certain types of information in order to do a proper background check. And again, those are the questions you should be asking on your application process. There might even be a separate form that you present to conduct the background check to get the necessary information. But when that background check comes back in, you're looking for felonies,
major felonies,
assault, battery, convictions,
violent crimes,
theft.
And remember, if your applicant is 40, they may have something that was 20 years earlier. And it may be a violent crime. Maybe they got caught carjacking when they were 21. when they lived in the hood, they didn't go to school, they were having trouble in life, whatever, but now they're 41. They've worked for the last 10 years at one job. They had a job before that for the prior 8. They've got 3 kids now. They've been married, not divorced. This person has changed. Don't just say that, oh, their background check came back with a violent carjacking. I'm going to disqualify them.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta weigh, or you have to analyze the background check in context of the individual and what it was. And I think the main point is that just because there's a negative mark on the background check, don't discount that person. Think about when it was, what it was, put it into context of their position.
And one important thing about the background check, we talked about this pre-podcast today. On their application, you're going to ask the question, or the question should be there about, are you convicted? Have you had any convictions of a felony? Or if you go with, have you been convicted of any crime? Please describe it. They'll write something down. People are embarrassed. So here's a 26-year-old guy coming in. He fills out his application and he marks no. And even if it's just passing bad checks, hanging paper, writing bad checks, and on the background check, it comes back that he pled guilty to a misdemeanor petty theft charge that stemmed from passing bad checks. Well, first off, he's lied to you. But when you can ask him about it. Hey, on your application it says none, but your background check came back, and he may genuinely show you outward emotion of being embarrassed and sorry. And now you got to take that with a grain of salt and decide, okay, I can understand. So you have to, operators, you have to get yourself in the mindset of, this is an embarrassing time in everyone's life when they go to jail or they get arrested or they get convicted. It's embarrassing. And they may not want to come straight up and tell you, especially because most operators don't do background checks, and it's never brought to the front.
If you're an applicant filling out the application, our advice would be, don't lie, disclose everything, be upfront, because that is going to help you if there is something or if there is a mark. It bodes well on the applicant when you're forthright and you disclose, what's being asked on the application.
And in California, there are mandatory state law that requires a full FBI and Department of Justice background check, and it will get everything that's on there. So if you're in California and you're applying for a job, you have to go through a full, state background check.
Yeah, they're going to see everything, so you might as well just disclose it. And even if the application just asks for felony, I don't think it's a bad idea to say, hey, listen, I have, a DUI conviction, or, but whatever it is, just put it out there and let it be known, and let your character at the current moment be the determining factor, not just necessarily that background check. But in the bigger picture of the background check, what we're looking for is an individual who isn't going to be a liability at our place of employment or at the establishment. And, we talk a lot about liability. In fact, a lot of our podcasts have been just around that topic. But you don't want somebody that's going to cost you.
Well,
with stupid decisions.
So many cases that I deal with as an expert witness, I'll ask the attorneys, if I'm working for the club or if I'm working for the plaintiff, the person that's suing the bar, I'll tell both sides of attorneys, do you really know the background of your guards or of the guards that were involved? What do you mean? Do a background check on them. Well, I would think that would be, no, don't expect anything. And here's the bar who does a background check on their 2-year door guard, and he's currently on probation for armed robbery, where he pistol whipped someone. And now he's at your door, and you're being sued because he beat someone up at your door.
And you have to put it in context of when a jury or a judge looks at that information, and they're looking at you as a responsible or supposed to be a responsible operator. How does that look if you didn't even do the background check?
And one underlying thought is, one of the pushbacks I get on background checks and finding information like this is that, Robert, everybody deserves a second chance. And I say, yes, they do. So they just don't deserve a second chance working security at my bar or club. I'm sorry. This is a position that requires you to be above reproach. And I can't have you, while you're on probation, while you're on parole, for a violent felony, or violent misdemeanor, possibly losing your temper with one of our clients. I can't have that. It's too much of a risk for me.
Yeah. And it just goes back to what we talked about at the top of the show with that news story out of Orlando, that being a bouncer, you're held to a higher standard. Your requirements for a position are going to be more stringent than if you're the dishwasher or if you're the line cook or if you're the bar back. That's just the way it is. And that's, as an operator and owner, that's the way you have to think about it.
Quickly mention our partner, IntelliCorp.
IntelliCorp is a partner that we use for our background checks. Actually, we have a link to their website from our website. I'll put it in the show notes as well. They're somebody that we work with. They're obviously not the only ones out there that do it.
Gentlemen, our reference is Matt Garbinkas with IntelliCorp, and he set this up where you can click through our website, and if you had 3 people, it doesn't matter, 1 or 21, I believe the price is $14.95 to do a full national background check. Now, these are public record background checks that they can do. It's not the FBI or DOJ, but it's pretty darn extensive when you want to get something done.
Yeah, so we'll put that link up on our show notes. Also, we have the link on our website. Another thing that I just wanted to mention before we move on, Robert, is with the background check. Obviously, you're not going to background check every candidate. You're going to get that person through the screening, the application, the interview process, and this is going to be a candidate that you're on the 99%, I'm going to hire this guy. Now I'm going to background check him just as a final part of the process. So don't think that you have to go out and spend a ton of money on doing background checks. You vet the guy first or the individual first, and then we put him through the background check. So let's talk about, this is a candidate you want. He's a good guy. He's going to represent my company well. He's going to be a good addition to the team. I'm going to hire him. We bring him aboard. What are some of the things that operators forget about when it comes to hiring a security personnel person?
Well, again, I'm going to have to use California as an example. What I recommend to clients and non-clients, since January of 2011, they have an HR policy that requires you to be fully licensed before they hire you. The law is changing in New York. The law has changed in Louisiana. It's going to change in every state eventually, but California was the first. My meaning is, all right, this guy is good. He's on the ball. His resume is good. His connections are great. He's a outgoing, friendly guy. You're hired. You start work on Friday. Well, in California, once you hire him and then you decide to get him licensed, you have to pay for the whole thing.
So that's due to labor law. If they're already hired and you require a license, it's up to the employer to pay for that licensing process.
So obviously back at that application time, that screening process we mentioned of asking for proof and then verification of their state permit and their training certificate.
So I'm gonna clarify it. So you can, 2 ways, if you're in a state that requires licensing or if you're in a city that requires licensing. And again, just make sure to check with your local labor laws, your state labor laws, but generally this is the way it goes. You can require that they pay for their training and their background checks or certification licensing prior to hiring them. So you have to go out, get your license before I hire you. But if it comes to a point to where you've hired them and now you require it, it's up to the responsibility, or it's the responsibility of the employer to pay for that process. So just keep that in mind, employers. Also, once we hire the person, there's going to be a series of paperwork and acknowledgments that you're going to have this individual fill out. And generally, it's the same for all employees that come aboard a company. But things to consider when it comes to security is...
Do you have a policy and procedure manual? Do you have a security-specific policy and procedure manual? Any position you're getting nationwide, if there's a manual of some sorts, and if you don't have a policy and procedure manual, again, contact us. We can help you with that. But they should get a copy of it.
And the reason why it's really important with the security side of things is because there's such a large amount of potential liability that rests on that position that you really want to make sure they have the right information.
And hopefully your policy manual will tell them the things that they need to know. They may not remember it right off the bat, but give them a manual have that page signing that they received a copy of it. You know, a client, I'm going to mention his name, Chris Bailey up in Temecula, has a good process now with his manual. In fact, I think you saw his email that he's creating a test to remind his folks of the policy manual.
Being very proactive, getting everybody back on the same page.
Correct. So he gave them the manual, and this is what we suggest after you said, okay, we're going to hire this guy. Here's your manual. You need to know this. Here, sign this back page, the proof of receipt, and you're responsible for everything that's in this policy procedure manual. And the stuff we're talking about, and we'll do another show on that, but the uniform, the ID policy, the over-intoxication policy, the use of force policy, found narcotics policies, those type of things that you want them to be up to speed on, give it to them that first day that they're hired. Obviously, again, they're not going to know it by tomorrow. But one of the things Manny and I talked about is a probationary period, a 90-day probationary period.
Which is standard for most employers.
You know, whether you get rid of them in a month or you don't, at that 90-day period, give them a test. Let them know it's coming. Hey, you're going to be tested on this at the end of your probationary period. I'd advise you to talk to your teammates, read this manual, practice these procedures, because in 90 days, we're going to test you. Now, we're not going to fire you if you don't pass it. However, maybe you don't get all the shifts you're supposed to get until you pass the test. Now, it seems like a lot of work, and it might be initially, but I'm telling you, when you have to testify in court, when you have to try to prove that you've done everything you could to train and bring your employees up to speed, you've truly done it.
I'm going to suggest a couple other things, Robert, when you hire somebody. So part of the paperwork process, you have your handbooks. We're talking about a specific security handbook, an acknowledgement to say, hey, yes, I did receive it. Always a good idea, especially on important information, acknowledgement. Another thing to consider with security guards, because uniforms, a lot of times companies will spend a lot of money on uniforms, and they'll give those to the individual they hire. If you have a uniform return policy, you know, you're required to provide them at least one in most states, but also if they want to get extras on their own, what the process is. Also equipment, which is very important. I know a lot of companies spend a lot of money on radios, headsets, flashlights, to have some sort of policy in place about returning those at the end of the night. Sign in, sign out sheets, that's also a good idea. And the last thing I wanted to mention is contact information. Consider the contact information that you ask for, and usually you do that on an emergency contact form. And we've talked about this in previous shows. What will happen is if a case comes through, and let's say you have a lawsuit on the table, and we need to get a hold of an employee that no longer works for us. A lot of times these guys get lost because we don't have good contact information. So
I think it goes back to our application process again. Maybe that's another point you need to put on your application process, some of those vital contact information questions.
Yeah, so references are one way. Another good way to find somebody is high schools that they attended.
Yeah.
Relatives, so you can include that on the emergency contact information.
One of the best ones, because where you went to high school, they're going to keep track of where your parents live, where your grandparents lived, and that's how they're going to notify you of a 10, 20, 30-year class reunion. So if you get that information of where they went to high school, the high school can help you track that person down.
So it's important that you think in terms of what happens when this person leaves. If I need to get a hold of them, how am I going to get a hold of them? So think on that as well. And then, Robert, we talked, our last point was after you hire a person. We're big on this, but the most important thing you can do after you hire someone,
get them trained.
Train, and then what? Train them some more.
Keep training. I think that's what we do. I mean, it's obvious that we're going to push that. We're a training consulting company, but we've got companies that bars, single and multiple bars, that upon hiring, once Joe is hired, they are required to log in and take our new hire program online. And it's only about an hour and a half to 2 hours long at the most. There are test quizzes with it, but it gives the worker in any state the basic elements of what their job is. So at least you have something the first couple of days they're working. If you're in California, obviously you have to have this 16 hours of state license training. But if you're in Nevada or Florida or New Jersey, find a way to get them trained. And if it's through our website, great. We have the best training out there. So get this employee and tell them, okay, I want you to complete this training. It's a part of your job, but I want you to do it at your leisure. Once you're done, and remember the labor law issues you'll have to look up. But what many employers have done that I've seen it work for them, I'm not telling you to do this on your own, but they've told the employee, once you complete it, it's going to cost you X amount of dollars. Once you complete it, bring us your certificate of completion, and we'll give you back the money. So now you're kind of assured that the person has completed it, and then you are eventually paying for it. We've got other clients to get their people trained. They don't use the new hire. They use the full Host Platinum program, which is our full 16-hour program to be trained. If you don't do that, get them some other training, because if they're not trained, they're going to make mistakes.
Yeah, and it's just such an important position, and the thing that we preach here pretty much every week is just how to mitigate the liability. And really what we're trying to do is save owners and operators a lot of heartache and grief and money in the long run to do your due diligence and really treat your security personnel as a very, very important aspect of your business. So training, of course we do it. We're not the only ones. If you have an in-house, make sure it's comprehensive. Make sure you have somebody in charge of it. Make sure you're reviewing it to make sure that the practices are what they need to be to industry standards. Another thing that I wanted to mention, Robert, about after you hire is it's a good idea to keep a calendar or in a timeline for each individual so you know when their 90-day probation is up. If the person's not working out, discuss it with your management team. Cut that person loose before they become a liability. If he's got a temper, he's a hothead. If he's not doing what he's supposed to, if he doesn't follow your expectations, just make the decision. It's always tough to let somebody go, but it's a lot easier during that probationary period.
One of the terms I use a lot, and I just believe in it so much that I say it a lot when I'm training and when we've done these podcasts. But as an operator, manager, you've got to remember, this is show business, not show friends. So even though he may be someone you know, and he may have been with you, this is not a new hire. This is someone that's been with you for a year. If they make the mistakes that are going to cost you money, they've got to go. And if it's a new hire, it should be even easier for you to get rid of them.
Yeah, and you have a good sense. I mean, there's people that are going to make mistakes early on in their employment, and you're gonna find out whether or not that person can learn from their mistakes and move forward, or you're going to know and recognize that, all right, this isn't just going to work out. And from an operator standpoint, the one way to look at it or ask yourself the question is this decision good for the business? And you can always get a yes or no answer, when you ask yourself that question. That's on any decision within a business. Is it good for the whole? Is it good for the entirety of the operation? And that'll help you make the decision. And keeping a timeline, a calendar, and another thing to do is make sure you are on top of, if you're in a state that requires licensing, their renewal. In California, it requires every 2 years that you get your renewal for training.
After the initial 2 years of training, 1 year, every year after, it's 2 hours of training.
2 hours of training. So make sure that you put someone in charge of that, an HR person, a security supervisor, a manager, to make sure that they're on top of everyone's requirements, probationary period, and it's also good for when raises come around for reviews. Robert, you got anything to add?
Well, I guess we're going to close out, but I wanted to make sure, if you're an operator from a small venue, we've given you so much to digest. I don't expect you to start tomorrow with interviews, panel interviews, changing applications. I really don't expect that, because sometimes there's going to be days when you just have to hire someone. I know that. And one of the points that Manny and I discussed, again, pre-podcast, was, okay, if you want to take some of this and do it and get it going, fantastic. You're going to be better off to have 5 applications in your drawer, checking them once in a while. When you need someone to be able to pull an application out and call them and say, hey, are you still looking for work? If he says, yeah, great, bring them on in, and you've already pre-done so much. But there may be that time when On Saturday night, you fire Jim. On Tuesday, his buddy Joe doesn't come. Now, on Thursday night, you only have 2 guards and you need 4. Yes, you may have to hire someone off the street. You may even hire a customer before they start drinking and say, hey, I need you to, would you like a job? And he says, sure, I want a job.
Don't do that.
But on Thursday night, when you need someone on Friday to meet your minimum mandatory that you have to do,
it happens.
And the police are coming by to inspect you at St. Patrick's Day, you got a large crowd, I get it. But do not be afraid to back up on Monday and say, hey, thanks for working that night.
Or just tell the candidate it's contingent on this trial basis.
That's right.
And you're going to go through a formal.
And put him through the formal hiring process that next week.
All right, so we went long on the show. We're going to wrap it up. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll just close it out with everything that we want you to know, and we'll be right back.
If you like our show, visit nightclubsecurity.com for more information and access to free resources. Remember, that's www.nightclubsecurity.com.
All right, and we're back. Robert, we got to wrap it up. Couple quick announcements. We got some dates coming up. We got an LA date coming up September 30th, October 1st, and October 2nd. We're going to be doing the California PSO training at Akbar.
Yep, Akbar at the corner of Sunset Boulevard and Fontaine, 4356 West Sunset Boulevard in LA.
So we actually have, we'll have a link up on our show notes as well as our website under events if you're interested in the LA training. That's going to be the PSO. Room is limited. We're almost full. So if you are looking to get in on that, make sure you sign up as soon as possible. And there is discounts for signing up early for early registration. Other dates haven't locked down. Have we locked down DC yet? Yeah,
DC's locked down for Monday and Tuesday, October 14 and 15. That'll be at Shadow Room as always, 2131 K Street Northwest in DC.
And that's in conjunction with RAMW,
the Restaurant Association of Metro DC, and the DC Nightlife Association.
And again, we'll have information on our events on our website. Any other dates, Robert?
We've got some down the future, but I don't want to put those out yet.
Okay, so that's it for our dates as far as training. If you have any questions, comments, please let us know at questions@nightclubsecurity.com. We'd love for you to like us on Facebook. You can find us under Bouncer Training or Bouncer Trainer. Also, find us on Twitter. Again, links will be on our show notes for that. If there's anything that we can do for you in regards to nightclub security, we offer consulting, in-person training, online training, expert witness. You can find all that information on our website, nightclubsecurity.com. Anything else, Robert?
Nope, that's it.
All right. I'm Manny Marquez.
I'm Robert Smith.
And be nice.